So iOS 12 dropped yesterday, which is pretty exciting. First question that kind of comes to my mind with iOS updates is how much slower is my slowest iPhone going to be, which is this iPhone 6 Plus. I've been doing speed tests with iOS 11 devices for last day and iOS 12 devices, same devices I upgraded. And I think I have enough data points to come to some conclusions. I'm on my way home to kind of finalize the rest of this video. I think it's going to be very difficult to see the minor performance upgrades that iOS 12 is going to offer these devices, but that's kind of the point of this video. So how much slower is this iPhone 6 Plus going to be? We're going to find out.
So this graph illustrates the most positive change when it comes to iOS 12. It deals with how quickly the apps load between iOS 11 and iOS 12. But the biggest difference isn't the speed, it's the difference between the blue and green bars that's the most interesting. Now, is app loading 2 times as fast according to Apple? I can't say for sure. Now here's a graph of the most negative thing I found. This is a graph of the timing for all the keyboard display, and I can't really see a difference despite Apple's claim of being 50% faster. Now in general, Apple is pretty good with making their iOS updates work with older devices. I was actually very surprised to see that the iPhone 5S is still on the list of supported devices, given that it was the last supported device for iOS 11. They just usually knock them off one by one as the years go on. Now this is going to be an important detail when it comes to which device is going to get the most out of iOS 12. I'll explain at the end. Now with iOS 12, Apple has made some pretty bold claims, which include 7 times faster for the camera off the lock screen, 50% for keyboard display, and 2 times faster app launch. Now these numbers all look incredible until you realize that there's a little footnote for every one of these claims, and if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, read the note, you'll see that those claims are for the iPhone 6 Plus, which works for me because I've got one right here. So in the next few minutes, I want to show you what I've done for the speed test, which includes measuring boot times, camera loading, keyboard loading, all the app load times. I'm also going to talk about which iPhone will benefit the most from iOS 12. So when you guys are done watching this video, I do want to know what you guys think about what I've shown you because it's a little inconclusive, just a little bit.
Real usage, real reviews. MobileReviewsEh.ca.
At MobileReviewsEh, Monty and I base all our videos on actual usage. So for this speed test video, I ended up measuring the boot times for each device. I then tested the camera opening by, opening the camera app dozens of times per device. Then I went with the keyboard and loaded the keyboard a bunch of times and then opened apps for several hours on end. It was kind of tedious. Now, after all that, I installed iOS 12 on all the devices. Then I did the same test with the same devices. It took me a day. Now for this video, to help you guys identify the different phones, I used an iPhone 6 Plus in a bright orange Thule X3, an iPhone 6s in a red Rhino Shield Playproof, an iPhone 7 in a green Griffin Survivor Clear, an iPhone 8 Plus in a pinkish Spec Presidio Grip, and an iPhone 10 in a navy Rhino Shield Mod NX with the peach rim. Every iPhone I used had a decent battery, with the worst device having an 89% battery life, which was the iPhone 6s. At 89%, it's still registered as having peak performance capability. When it comes to boot times, every device running iOS 12 ran faster than iOS 11, which is a good thing. But oddly enough, the boot time for iPhone 6 Plus, if I go back a year ago, was 26 seconds in iOS 10, which is 2 seconds faster than the same device running iOS 11. Now in general, there's nothing surprising with this graph, as it's kind of expected. Boot time has improved. Now on to everyone's favorite app, the keyboard app. I'm kidding. Let's talk about the camera. Now the camera was the hardest thing to test for, the most confusing, and definitely the most eye-straining. I basically went through all my recorded footage and measured the time it took for the lock screen to disappear off the iPhone to the time that the image appeared in focus. And I used that number as the load time. And I'll be honest with you, this was a bad way to measure it. Now with this camera part, Apple claims that there might be an improvement of 70% when it comes to camera swiping off the lock screen, if you're running an iPhone 6 Plus. So it makes sense that you would have less improvement with newer devices. With the iPhone 7 and 10, there wasn't a noticeable difference, but the iPhone 8 had a better camera app opening speed between 11 and 12, so the 8s and the 10s should be from the same vintage of hardware, we'll say, so that seemed odd to me, out of place. Now with the iPhone 6 Plus, the device recorded a third of a second improvement going from iOS 11 to 12, which is about a 50% improvement, which isn't bad, but it's no 70%. Now, on the flip side, based on how I recorded the times, the iPhone 6s took much longer to fall into focus with the iOS 12 update, which is really odd to me because it's one of the fastest devices to open the camera. If I measure the time it takes to open the camera without fully focusing, the speed sits around 6, 7, 8, 9 seconds. Now personally, I think I've got a Frankenstein of an iPhone 6s since it has the brightest screen out of all my iPhones, and the camera works, well, as you just saw, incredibly fast despite the fact that it shouldn't. You know, it kind of seems like an outlier when it comes to an iPhone. Onto the keyboard. So I'll be honest with you, I think I had a bit of a brain fart when it came to the keyboard, because how I interpreted Apple's bit on the website was that the keyboard display, when you access it in the Safari, was going to be faster. Now, I kind of realized that that might be the case, but also the keys showing up when you're typing might occur faster as well. Now, by the time I realized this, all my devices were on iOS 12, and there's no way you can reload an old iOS. So, yikes. Now, to get the results that I'm showing you in this video, I basically recorded the times my finger pressed something in Safari to activate the keyboard to when the keyboard stopped moving. And like the camera test, my results were, well, inconclusive. My really old devices seemed to bring the keyboard up quicker between iOS 12 and 11, but the newer devices were the complete opposite. They were slower. But I do have to point out that everything I measured to the 1/30th of a second. The biggest difference in the keyboard came from the iPhone 8 Plus, and that difference equals to 1/20th of a second, so it's almost not noticeable. Now, right before I started filming the actual video, I realized that I did have one more device in my home, which is running iOS 11, which was my wife's work device. Since it's technically not ours, I can't mess with it, but I could do some keyboard tests with it to see if the keys are slower and faster. Honestly, I couldn't pick out the difference. The timing on the keyboard is so fine that 1/30th of a second isn't going to pick up if it's faster or slower. So I'm kind of back to square one in saying that I have no idea if the keyboard speed upgrade is actually happening. So this is the first time you're watching one of my videos, I do encourage you to click subscribe, hit the bell button so you get notified of, when I'm going to drop the iPhone XS Max on some concrete in about 3 days, which is going to be pretty awesome. I put a lot of effort into these videos. It's almost midnight and I'm still cranking away. I've been at this video for about 2 days now. It's taken way longer than I thought it would, but I just need to mix down the music, which is kind of nice. Then I can go to sleep. Anyways, again, first time watching my videos, subscribe, push the bell. On to the app loading speeds, which makes way more sense to me. For these tests, I used 4 apps. The first was Flipboard, my go-to newsreader. Next was Filmic Pro, which is my go-to filming app for these videos. Next was Escapist, a game I paid money for, I think, but I've actually never played. And Plague Inc., which is a great game to play while doing number 2. Now, the general trend is that apps in iOS 12 open faster than iOS 11, with newer devices being faster. That's the general trend. That makes sense. Now, Flipboard and Filmic Pro had updated apps at the time of testing, whereas in the games hadn't been updated in months, so I'm assuming those performance numbers are going to improve. Regardless, the biggest jump in performance between all the iPhone for the apps was the iPhone 6 Plus, my oldest iPhone, which is a great thing for people who want to keep their old device around a little longer. With that being said, the performance difference between the iPhone 6 Plus and all the other iPhones is quite noticeable, only if you're using them side by side. If you're not, generally, you won't know any better. Just ask my mother. She's still running an iPhone 6 Plus and has no qualms about the performance of the device, despite being the person who uses her device the most in my family. Now, the point of doing all the individual app timings wasn't to see if iOS 12 is going to be faster. That was kind of a nice side outcome. What I was really hoping to do with the app timings was to see if I could see the 2 times faster app launch, which occurs under a load. So I chain loaded 3 apps, Flipboard, Filmic Pro, and Plague Inc. When strung together, my iPhone 6 Plus saw a tiny performance improvement. My iPhone 7 saw the biggest improvement, and for some odd reason, the iPhone 10 was a tad slower when looking at the times between iOS 11 and 12. Now, the neatest thing shows up when I compare the same chart with the iOS 11 data. The gap between successive app openings and the summed up individual times is much larger in iOS 11. Now, is it 2 times as fast? I can't say, but it is faster. Regardless, the overall performance in iOS 12 is going to be faster across all devices. And that graph is and that graph is going to be the most indicative of how much iOS 12 is going to be faster over iOS 11. So which device is going to get the most mileage with the iOS 12 update? Now, we can easily go and default to the slowest one, which is the iPhone 6 Plus, but it's not the case. It's the iPhone 6s that's going to get the most out of the iOS 12 update. Based on my data points, the general performance of the iPhone 6s is only about 10% slower across the board than the iPhone 8 and 10 with multitasking, which isn't too bad given that this device was released in 2015. You could potentially use this device until 2020. my guess. I personally doubt that Apple's going to knock off 2 devices off the bottom of their recommended data list for iOS 13. Now, if you're running an iPhone 6 and maybe in 5S, maybe it is time to upgrade your device. iOS 12 might give your device a lease of life for a few more months, but for whatever reason, the device is just very, very slow, especially when you compare it to the iPhone 10. And it will be even slower when compared to the new iPhone XS's. So that's all I got. What do you guys think about all this data that I've collected? Have I interpreted it kind of properly? Again, it's been very difficult to come to solid conclusions about which one's better, which one's faster. There are just so many factors that come into play when it comes to how fast these iPhones actually perform. You know, the biggest one that we know of is the battery, but I can think of other things that could hamper the performance, like this iPhone 6 Plus was used in my screen test, and it's got a giant dent on the back of the iPhone. I'm pretty sure that's going to do something to the performance. Maybe, I don't know. But if you look at the general trends, it does look like iOS 12 is going to work quite well on older devices, especially with the iPhone 6s. Questions, comments, leave them down there. That's kind of all I got. Go! So we talked about camera, we talked about timing, we talked about the apps. Is there anything else that I missed? Did I miss anything, puppy? You're not a puppy anymore, are you? You're an old man dog. Old man dog who does not want to be here.